Heraclitus once said, "Nothing is constant except change." Maybe you have heard these words before. We all face changes every day, and we each deal with change differently. Today we are going to analyze the poem "Everything Has Changed Except Graves," written by Mzi Mahola. In this poem, the speaker returns to his childhood town and school. While standing there, he noticed the many changes that have taken place. Wait, before I end up analyzing the whole poem, let's talk about the poet first. Mzi Mahola was born in 1949. He grew up in Lushington in the Eastern Cape. He lived from infancy to the age of 12 with his grandparents in Lushington in the Eastern Cape, before in 1962 joining his parents in Port Elizabeth. Schooling at Lovedale College and at Hilltown, where he began to write poetry, followed by an interrupted period of study at Fort Hare University, kept him in touch with his region and with family and friends. After 1989, he started writing again, submitting work successfully to national and international journals, magazines, and publications. His name is also inscribed at the New Brighton Library Wall of Fame for his contribution in community development. He attributes that to his childhood in the farming communities that broadened his mental horizons by exposing him to nature, hardship, and moral values. His poems celebrate aspects of the post-apartheid country, but frequently points to areas of disappointment with the present, because it is supposed to be a time of freedom and happiness after a terrible past. Everything has changed except graves. I stood at the ruins of my former school, where I was patiently molded. Wild plants own every space now. My soul was paralyzed. What happened to the roofs and doors and windows? Can these dumb, lonely walls still recognize me? Everything has changed. The ground where we ran and laughed, and the corner of the playground where I pommeled a schoolmate almost to pulp, are scarfed with wattle to conceal my shame. A short distance away stands a renovated church, a Dutch Reformed formerly, now a Methodist, embraced by a mute little cemetery that claims the past. The dividing fence has vanished, though growth strangles it to near extinction. Called names of departed whites who were part of this community and made monumental contributions are etched on the headstones. Sometimes whites come here to clean and to put flowers on their family graves, a voice whispered next to me. But I do not recognize its face, because Lushington has changed, except the graveyard. Remember, every poem tells a story. Once you know the story, analyzing the poem becomes much easier. In this poem, the speaker goes back to visit his hometown of Lushington. He finds his old school campus abandoned and in ruins. While still standing there, he remembers how much patience and care his teachers showed him, and how their education formed him into the man he is now. Over many years, his teachers have transformed the rough material of his personality and turned him into a useful, productive, and educated person. He also recalls with shame what a bully he was. Many changes have taken place. He is shocked at how untidy and broken down the school grounds are. The state of affairs depresses him. The windows and roofs are either damaged or stolen. The speaker is wondering where they disappeared to. In contrast to the ruins of the school, the church next to the school has been renovated. The church, formerly a Dutch Reformed church, which was previously frequented by white people, is now a Methodist church, which welcomes people of all races. The speaker again indicates the fact that nothing is the same except the graves that are sometimes cleaned by the whites. And that is basically the poem in a nutshell. Let's look at the type and form of the poem. This poem is a free verse and consists of 2 stanzas. The first stanza is written in a narrative form, switching between the present and the past tense as the speaker tells about his visit to his old school in Lushington. He shares his experiences at the school and then tells about his visit to the cemetery. The second stanza is written in the present tense and the speaker portrays what he hears and what he feels when he looks around in the cemetery. The poem has no specific rhyme scheme. It does, however, have some internal rhyme due to the use of sound devices. The setting. The setting is a place or type of surroundings where something is positioned or where an event takes place. It also refers to the time in which the story takes place. The setting of this poem is Lushington, a township near Alice in the Eastern Cape. The time, the present-day South Africa, or the recent past, after the end of apartheid in 1994. Symbolism. The poet describes many localities or points of interest throughout the poem. Each place symbolizes a part in his life and the influence that it had on his life. The school, for example, is a symbol of hope and education. The church symbolizes how the painful past can be renewed to accommodate change. In line 26, the poet describes the monumental headstones of the graves. These headstones appear to be huge. These people thought their achievements in life were great, which is why they got big, important, expensive headstones on their graves. But monumental also means to make a literal monument or a memorial. The graves are a reminder that white people were in charge of the town during apartheid. The impact apartheid had on the speaker's life was monumental. The speaker. The speaker is the poet, Mzi himself. We know this to be true because he begins the poem with the personal pronoun I in line 1, indicating first-person narrator. We also know that Lushington is Mahola's childhood hometown in real life. In this poem, he is a grown man because he is writing about his school days and how they are over now. The structure of the poem. The sentences are short, which makes each line thought-provoking. The poem consists of 2 stanzas. Each one seems to move the reader further away from literally the school and figuratively his past. It is as if the speaker is leaving his past behind. The tone and mood can be seen as somber, nostalgic, and melancholic. Somber or sad because the speaker sees the state of neglect in his old school and childhood town. He feels as if he no longer belongs to Lushington. He doesn't even recognize the voice whispering next to him in line 31. This is further evidence in phrases used by the poet in line 1, I stood at the ruins, line 8, dumb lonely walls, and line 20, mute little cemetery. Nostalgic, in other words, yearning for the past. The speaker is reminded of his school days. He is shocked because the school is in ruins. And finally, melancholic, we see the speaker being indifferent in the last stanza. The speaker does not even acknowledge the person whispering to him. If we were to separate the tone and the mood from one another, we would say, the tone is quiet, sad, and full of regret. He feels as if he is a witness to the destruction of hope. His school has been ruined and there is no one there. His mood, on the other hand, is gloomy, depressed, and disappointed when he sees his old school in ruins. He feels lonely because everybody he knew is gone. The word stood and former in line 1 and 2 indicates that the poem is reflective or contemplative. The poet is thinking about the times that happened in the past in the different areas of the town and how it influenced his life and personality. His childhood was full of the struggle of education, yet his story speaks of success because he's now a well-known poet. The title consists of two different parts. Firstly, the things that have changed, and secondly, the one thing that has not. The things that changed are his childhood town and school, his life, and the political environment in South Africa. The one thing that has not changed are the graves. Graves are a reminder of the past, which cannot be changed. The same graves are still in the cemetery, and the same white people are still inside the graves, or at least we hope so. Themes. There are three main themes in this poem. The past versus the present, change is inevitable, and the sense of loss. The past versus the present. In the poem, the speaker seems to be nostalgic as he goes back to a place he grew up in and visits his school. He shares some of his childhood memories as he reflects on his childhood life. He then speaks of the present condition of the school, its surroundings, and how things look like as he looks at the place. He is upset that the past has not been preserved and looked after. On his return to Lushington, everything had changed. Not all for the better. Change is inevitable. The speaker visits his former childhood school and hometown after many years and reflects on the change he sees. The school building and the playground are unrecognizable because they are overgrown with wild plants. The speaker has also changed. At the time of the fight with his schoolmate, the speaker might have felt justified in order to defend himself. Now, his older self is ashamed of the incident. The big tree hides the evidence of what he now sees as shameful. Lushington has changed so much that the speaker no longer has a sense of belonging. The poet also addresses how the process of time, politics, and human nature have an effect on the landscape that is both positive and negative. These effects can be seen in the changes found throughout the town in which he grew up. We note that time changes everything but death and leaves only memories of the living. According to the poet, life is unpredictable, since we do not know what will happen. Lushington itself has changed. People have left, buildings have fallen into ruins, and the political landscape has changed. The only thing we can be sure of is death. In this poem, the theme of loss is the most prominent. The loss of innocence with the incidents that happened on the playground, the loss of the traditional ways of the town as it has transformed, and the loss of a school as it has been taken over by weeds. Allow me to mention that the poet also addresses the issue of nature or wilderness versus civilization in the poem. Weeds and wattle trees have taken over the school grounds, and the speaker realizes that if we do not keep trying to build and create things, our efforts are destroyed. Here are a few words from the poem with their basic definitions. Feel free to add more words to the list. It is important for you to understand and know the basic definition of all the words used in a poem. I recommend you pause the video now and go through the list on your own. I will explain some of these words as I analyze the poem. Line 1. I stood at the ruins. The poet returns to his former school that has been abandoned and has fallen into despair. He is contemplative and retrospective, thinking back over the places that formed his childhood. The I indicate a first-person narrator. The poet himself, as a grown man, tells the story. I need to explain the words stood and former in line 2 together. I will do so on the next slide. The word ruins refers to the loss of innocence with the incident that happened on the playground. The loss of the traditional ways of the town as it has transformed, and finally the loss of a school as it has been taken over by weeds. The word ruins is placed at the end of the line to place emphasis on the fact that an important part of his life is now in ruins. Line 2. Of my former school. A school symbolizes education and hope for the future of a child. The word stood in line 1 and former here in line 2 indicates that the poem is reflective. The speaker is standing at the remains of the school he attended when he was young. Line 3. Where I was patiently molded. The word molded literally means to be cut carefully with a sharp instrument. The speaker means that teachers use patience to educate him. It seems as if the poet feels appreciative of the education he received. He was patiently formed into what his dedicated educators wanted him to become, just like an artist shapes an artwork. But he admits that he never knew happiness in that school. Nevertheless, his character was shaped by teachers who were patient with young adolescent learners. This means that the process of building and developing the speaker's character was undertaken with great tolerance. They formed him into a useful, productive, and educated person. Line 4. Wild plants own every space now. Wild plants are weeds and alien plants. This is a form of personification. Wild plants or weeds have overgrown the schoolyard. It is as if these alien plants have invaded the whole area. This suggests the lack of human care and how uncontrolled the environment is. The speaker feels sad at the total neglect he is witnessing. The speaker is also in a state of shock and disappointment. Line 5. My soul was paralyzed. The full stop provides the reader with a chance to take a breath and catch up with all the thoughts given by the poet. This is a metaphor. Paralysis causes one's body not to move. If one's soul is paralyzed, one feels such deep unhappiness that it feels as if one were frozen or dead. One is unable to move, think, or feel properly. The speaker is devastated at the total despair he is witnessing. He is heartbroken. When he went there, he literally cried. He feels sad that things have been left to fall apart like they have. This not only applies to the school, but also to the community he grew up in and the country as a whole. Lines 6 and 7. What happened to the roofs, the doors, and the windows? The speaker asks a rhetorical question. He is not expecting to get an answer from anyone, but it is thought-provoking. He's just thinking out loud. He knows the answer. Vandals and thieves must have had a field day. The building has been abandoned. He is despondent and sad about the state the school is in. Remember, this also reflects on his village and the country as a whole. Lines 8 and 9. Can these dumb, lonely walls still recognize me? Dumb means they cannot speak. Another rhetorical question. It emphasizes the changes and the speaker's shock. He remembers the walls that resonated with the voices of teachers and learners. Now, the walls are dumb, silent, abandoned, and empty of posters. Normally, one would say that a person does not recognize the building. He realizes he has changed too, because he asked if the building still recognizes him. This is also a form of personification. The walls, which are inanimated objects, have been given human qualities of loneliness, recall, and recognition. The walls and poet can empathize with each other. Since he does not know how to react to the decay, he is dumbstruck. There is nobody else. Everybody he knew is gone. The poet experiences a sense of isolation and loss. It is as if he has lost a familiar friend. In the years that have elapsed, they have become like strangers, just like people who have not seen one another for some time. Line 10. Everything has changed. The semicolon provides the reader with a pause to think about the contrast between past and present times. Despair is evident. Things have not improved. In fact, everything has deteriorated. He uses repetition. The speaker echoes the title of the poem to emphasize that things are much worse now. This repetition indicates the state of disbelief that the speaker finds himself in. Line 11. The ground where we ran and laughed. Typical schoolboy fun. Everything was uncomplicated and carefree. After so many years had elapsed, the playground had shrunken to the size of a garden plot. This happens when we return to a space we had last seen as a youngster. You remember it being big and now it seems so small. Since everything has changed, the implication is that his life is not that carefree any longer. Lines 12 and 13. And the corner of the playground where I pommeted a schoolmate almost to a pulp. Pommel means to hit repeatedly with one's fist, causing serious damage. In explaining the extent of the damage caused during the fist fight, the speaker exaggerates as he compares the schoolmate's beaten face to soft remains of something that has been processed. This is called hyperbole. He remembers a playground where he beat up a schoolmate. Ironically, he hit a friend, a mate. He even remembers the specific place where the incident occurred vividly. Fights are also part of growing up. What is worrying is the level of aggression evident in the poet. He hit the boy repeatedly until he was limp and bleeding. Remember, he was a boxer, a South African flyweight champion. Thus, he could use his fists. Now, the memory causes him to feel ashamed of his aggressive behavior because he realizes that it is immature and wrong to try to resolve one's differences with violence. The poet makes use of alliteration, the repetition of the P sound. The sound is loud and explosive and highlights the brutal beating. Lines 14 and 15 are scarfed with wattle to conceal my shame. Conceal means to cover up. The full stop emphasizes his shame and its long-term effects. At the time of the fight, the poet might have felt justified in order to defend himself or his pride. Now, his older self is ashamed of the incident. Wattle trees are now growing in the place where he hit the schoolmate. There's a sense of irony. Although he now behaves differently, meaning change has taken place, his bad behavior, the past, cannot be changed, and he still feels ashamed. This is also a metaphor. The place where the fight took place is now hidden by a tree as a scarf would hide a face. The wattle trees are compared to a scarf around someone's neck. There are so many trees that they are choking or cutting off the school grounds. This can also be seen as personification. The building is so overgrown with weeds and bush that it seems to be strangled by the plants. Lines 16 to 19. A short distance away stands a renovated church, a Dutch Reformed formerly, now a Methodist. Let's have a quick look at the church. During apartheid, it was the Dutch Reformed Church, the main church of the Afrikaans-speaking population. A strong supporter of apartheid, no black people were allowed because it advocated white supremacy. Now, the church has changed. The structure has changed. It has now been renovated, and the denomination has changed. The focus of the townspeople has changed from Afrikaans to English, from apartheid to non-racial. The use of the capital for church shows its importance in the community. The renovated church and the abandoned school create an antithesis. The poet mentions the change in church to show that it is different to the school grounds. The church has been renovated, rebuilt, and cared for. People use it. The school has been abandoned and left to nature. He realizes if we do not keep trying to build and create things, our efforts are destroyed. Lines 20 and 21. Embraced by a mute little cemetery that claims the past. Embrace means it surrounds the churchyard. Mute means unable to speak. This is a metaphor and a form of personification. Literally, it can mean silent or undisturbed. Figuratively, the graveyard does not give any clues about how the town has changed. The poet has to find his own answers. The cemetery claims the past. The tombstones remind him of people who passed away, specifically white people. They have been long dead. They now belong to the cemetery. Just a reminder of the past. Like these white people, apartheid is also dead. Line 20 refers to the cemetery as mute, in other words, quiet. This is a subtle way of referring to the cemetery as being a place of death. This is called euphuism. Line 22. The dividing fence has vanished. Literal. The fence has not been mended and has, like the school, become dilapidated. Figurative. Apartheid is over. There are no separations between black people and white people anymore. Line 23. The growth strangles it to near extinction. This is another form of personification. The growth, the plants, is strangling, which is a human quality. The graveyard. Literally, the graves are overgrown by weeds. The wild plants have taken over. Lines 24 to 27. Called names of departed whites who were part of this community and made monumental contributions are etched on the headstones. Called is associated with death and indifference. The speaker does not know the people, so he does not care about them. They leave him cold. It can also refer to the cold-heartedness of these people. These dead people supported apartheid and did not care for their fellow South Africans. Instead of using the word dead or deceased, the speaker refers to the deceased as the departed. This is another form of euphuism. The alliteration of the C sound highlights the distant nature of white people. They were a part of their own community, not interacting with black people. This hints at the racial tension of those times. Even though the headstone provides an eternal remembrance, the family have moved on and forgotten their ancestors' accomplishments. This creates a form of irony. No human can do something so great or monumental that they will be remembered forever. Etched means carved into the stone. Because these words are carved in stone, the message does not fade or change as everything else did. It is like etching them on monuments so that they should never be forgotten for their contribution. Even though everything has changed, the painful effects of apartheid are permanently etched in the hearts and minds of many people. Lines 28 to 30. Sometimes whites come here to clean and put flowers on their family graves. Lines 29 and 30 are written in italics so that the reader may understand the difference, that this is a new voice speaking. The white people, who are now outsiders to this community, visit the graves of their departed. They clear the area of weeds and put flowers on the graves. The graveyard is the only place that is looked after. This causes the poet to question what has happened to his own community. Lines 31 to 33. A voice whispers next to me, but I do not recognize its face because Lushington has changed. Literally, the voice can refer to a self-appointed tour guide, an elderly school governing body member of the school he was visiting. Figuratively, it can be the voice of his memories. He does not recognize its face. He does not experience the joy he thought he would when he came back to see his old school, because everything there has changed, and not for the better. Note the use of senses. Hear the voice, see the face. Previously, he had known everybody. Now this person is a stranger, who in turn thinks the poet is unfamiliar with the area. The speaker repeats the title. The poet is disillusioned. His mental picture of his childhood village has been shattered. The poet is alarmed at the deterioration of the village and the fact that circumstances have worsened instead of improved. The repetition emphasizes the finality of the changes. Lushington is particular and special to the poet because it is his hometown. And finally, line 34, except the graveyard. A graveyard symbolizes the past. The graveyard is a place of death, and death does not change. Even though the town has changed, nothing can alter the past or his childhood. That concludes the analysis of this poem. Let's quickly recap the use of the word ruins in line 1. The word ruins indicates loss, the loss of innocence through the incident on the playground, the loss of tradition as it has transformed, and the loss of a school since it has been taken over by weeds. The school is more than just a building. It is a symbol of education and of hope for the future. Before I go, I want to show you this. Here are a few questions to test your understanding of the poem. Take some time to answer these questions. You can mark your work afterwards using the memo on the next slide. Remember to pay special attention to certain keywords in every question. Words like explain and describe are clues telling you exactly what you should do. In question 4, they ask you to quote 2 words. That means you need to copy 2 words from the poem and 2 words only. To indicate that you have indeed quoted from the poem, you must place your answers in quotation marks. None of the other questions have asked you to quote. Thus, do not use quotes from the poem to answer any of the other questions. Question 7 asks you to do 2 things: identify and explain. Make sure you do both. Always pay special attention to the marks allocated to each question. Most of these questions count 2 marks. Your answer should therefore be worthy of 2 marks. Here are the answers. I end with a few wise words from Mzi's own Facebook page. Experience has taught me that if you have a message to convey, use simple language to make it accessible to your reader. I also believe that what makes your work successful is not the amount of words that you use. It is not the quality of words that you use. It is not the story that you tell, but the choice of words that you use in telling your story. I would like to give a shout out to my former students from Polokwane. I have not forgotten you. Stay safe, guys, and remember, you are awesome.